Nearly 1,000 competitors duked it out in the first major Pokemon Pocket tournament after Extradimensional Crisis launched this past weekend. Today, let's go ahead and dive on into breaking down what was popular and what had the most successful results in this first large event. Our starting field this week is one of the most defined we've ever seen for a Week 1 Pokemon Pocket tournament, with Silvally Rampardos clocking in at a whopping 20%, Buzzwole variations accounting for 15%, Darkrai Giratina clocking in at 7.5%, Solgaleo Shinnok at 4.5%, and Charizard Incineroar at 4.5% as well. This does mean that almost half of our starting field was not in one of these most popular archetypes, though, with 48.5% being varying deck lists with 3% or less metagame representation. To help us draw some conclusions about the strength of the various decks played in this first tournament, I'll use a metric I call the performance delta. To calculate this, I look at the starting distribution that we just covered, and I compare it to the spread of deck lists in the 60% or win rate higher category, of which there were almost 200 out of our 1,000 competitors. Every single one of our 5 most popular decks increased its share between the starting and top performing deck distributions. Silvally Rampardos increased by 25% up to 25%. Buzzwole variations increased by a whopping 53% from 15 up to 23. Darktina saw a nominal increase from 7.5% up to 9. Solgaleo Shinnok was the best performer overall by the performance delta metric, jumping up by 67% up to 7.5% of our starting field, and Charizard Incineroar saw nominal gains as well, going from 4.5% up to 6%. All of these most popular decks making these amount of gains means that our other category fell off quite a bit, being just around 30% of our top performers this week. Let's kick off going over some deck list specifics with our most popular deck, the Silvally Rampardos shell. This build is relatively straightforward. You're guaranteed to open on type null as your only basic. Your copies of Gladion help you find Silvally very consistently while enabling it to smash for 100 points of damage for 2 energy. And then Rare Candy helps you get Rampardos online ASAP, with everything in this deck only offering 1 knockout point, meaning your opponent typically has to clear 3 things in order to get the win over you. I'll be interested to see how this deck list does in terms of popularity moving forward as our metagame develops, because looking at our matchup tables, it has some rough ones. It's only around a 40% win rate against almost every other one of the most popular decks, with Buzzwole, Giratina Darkrai, and Solgaleo Shinnok all beating it a majority of the time. That being said, Charizard Incineroar, our 5th most popular deck, was a strong matchup for this one, so if the Charizard deck gets more popular, Silvally Rampardos could stay around to match. Buzzwole variations were our 2nd most popular decks this week, with most of them fitting relatively close to the mold of the sample list I have up on screen now. 2 Celesteela and 2 Pheromosa are stock in almost all of them, while some are opting to play 1 Kartana like this list, while others are doing without it. In terms of utility cards, Leaf Cape and Cyrus are staples as 2-ofs, while things like Lusamine, Erica, Guzma, and others tend to be varying 1 and 2 singletons depending on what the pilot is exactly looking to hedge. Looking at our initial matchup tables for the week, this Buzzwole deck looks like it could be setting itself up as the archetype that occupies the polarized matchup section of our metagame this time around. It has strong matchups against both Giratina Darkrai and Silvally Rampardos, but it is incredibly weak against both Charizard Incineroar and Solgaleo Shinnok, losing to them almost 70% of the time in our samples from this first week. Up next, we have Solgaleo Shinnok, which plays out in practice exactly how I expected Shinnok to work in theory. Shinnok essentially means that you can assemble your 2 stage 2s pretty consistently, going Solgaleo into Solgaleo for 2 beefy things that hit hard and fast against your opponents. Shinnok also means that you have a clean answer to Oricorio without having to dedicate any extra slots to things like Skarmory that could be answering that. It's also important to call out that all of these deck lists are playing 1 copy of the Stage 1 Cosmium, because Shinnok can draw you into that, meaning when you need to evolve one of your 2 Solgaleos organically, Shinnok can help pull all that together for you. As far as matchup tables go, Solgaleo looks to be positioning itself as the 50% deck in the metagame, being relatively even into Cell Valley Rampardos and Giratina Darkrai. It's ahead against Buzzwole, as we mentioned moments ago, but it's a little bit behind against Charizard Incineroar, which seems pretty fine for this deck's position in the metagame since Charizard is one of our less popular top decks. Next up, I'd like to highlight our 2 deck lists from our previous metagames that were among our most popular this week, Darkrai Giratina and Charizard Incineroar. As you can see from these 2 sample lists, there wasn't a ton of innovation or new cards added to them. Some variations of Darkrai Giratina were playing a copy of Nihilego, like we show in the sample list here, along with 2 Poison Barb to enable it. This gives it an extra way to chunk out extra damage on its main lead, while also having more clean answers to Oricorio without being all in on something like the Koala Bear that we saw in previous seasons. Charizard Incineroar was incorporating some of our new utility cards like Repel, but any changes that you're making here are pretty nominal overall, and card for card, a lot of these deck lists in this archetype were the same as they were in our previous season. Before we wrap up today, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the Guzzlord variations that showed up in our first major tournament. While none of them were popular enough to make them onto the pie chart at the start of this video, there were a number that made a deep run with some key variations between them that I think are worth calling out. One of the deck lists that made the top 64 cut of the tournament was one featuring the full Ultra Beast Dark package with Nihilego, Celesteela, and Naganadel all present. This deck list is super clean with 2 Lusamine, 2 Poison Barb, and then a split of Cyrus and Sabrina to give you control over which cards your opponent has in the active spot when. I played a deck list similar to this that we'll have a highlight of on the channel later this week, and it felt really clean to me. You have some really aggressive games where Naganadel backed up by a Nihilego on your bench or 2 lets you start pumping out damage really quickly, and Guzzlord's massive HP along with Celesteela's ability to finesse in and out of your active spot with any of your Ultra Beasts on a dime gives this archetype a ton of flexibility to outmaneuver its opponent in key spots. The other variation of Guzzlord that saw some amount of play this weekend and also had someone make it into the top 64 with this sample list was one all in on the Guzz with Celesteela and a single copy of Nihilego to back it up against things like Oricorio, where Guzzlord can't close things out on its own. You can see this build is trying to leverage its tanky lead EX Pokemon with lots of sustain, like Pokemon Center Lady, as well as Poison Barb to help you pump out as much damage as you absolutely can. We even see a copy of our new Pokemon tool, Beastiite, in here as well, so you can ramp up the damage that your Guzzlords are doing as you get closer and closer to victory. Getting your Guzzlord's Tyrannical Hole attack up to 140 in a single swing once you've cleared their first EX seems like incredibly big game. To provide a little bit of speculation based on the information that we covered today, I would wager Silvally Rampardos is likely to fall off a little bit as it had weak matchups in the other popular decks this week, with the expectation being that Buzzwole variations and Solgaleo Shinnok will likely both increase a bit to fill that void. I would wager we'll probably see Buzzwole rise to that #1 slot in this coming week, unless we see something else get figured out in the metagame that could knock it off of that perch. As always, if you enjoyed my breakdown of our first week metagame here today, smash the like button on this video so you can hopefully help it reach some more people. If you're looking for some more off the beaten path deck lists with things like Tapu Koko EX and even Lycanroc EX and things like Stoutland that are finding success, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, have notifications turned on so you don't miss tomorrow's new decks roundup, where I'll be calling out individual deck lists that spiked solid results in this first week of events that could be worth considering as the metagame develops more. As always, I appreciate everybody that made it all the way through to the end of the video, and I hope your next pack is an excellent one.